In his book, The Greatest Gift of All by Robert Fulghum, he tells of a Christmas pageant many, many years ago that people are still talking about to this day. In a little town in the Midwest, whenever a Christmas pageant came around, everybody would mention the name Wally Perling. Why? Because Wally's performance in the annual production of the Nativity story had slipped into that realm of legend in this small community. The old-timers who were in the audience that night never tired of remembering exactly what happened and how it happened. You see, Wally was 9 years of age in the second grade, and people knew that he was just a little bit slow. But he loved everybody. And even though he was a little slow in the learning realm, he was also a natural protector of the little ones, of the younger ones, of the underdog. And if the older boys and guys would start to bang on the younger kids, it was always Wally that would say, "Oh, come on, let him play, let him be on the team." Wally caught the acting bug when he watched last year's pageant. He fancied himself a shepherd playing a flute, but the director had a better idea. She had a position for him, an acting position for him, that was far more important than a shepherd playing a flute. It was to be the innkeeper. And she wanted him there because he was bigger for his age, and it was only a few lines. So that would make his refusal, because he was big, it would make his refusal of Joseph very, very believable. And with many rehearsals behind him, the Christmas play opened to the usual large crowd in the school auditorium, and no one caught up more in the magic than Wally, standing behind the scenes, watching what was happening. He was transfixed by the performance. Then the moment came that Joseph and Mary were to enter, and Joseph walked on stage very slowly, taking care and guiding Mary. And they walked to the door of the inn, and Joseph rapped on that wood door. And and Wally, the innkeeper, was right on cue waiting, and he opened up the door with a brisk gesture and said, "What do you want?" "Please, sir," said Joseph, "we seek a place to stay." Wally looked straight ahead, and he said vigorously, "Well, seek it elsewhere. The inn is filled." "But, sir, we're so tired. We've asked elsewhere, and no one will take us in." Wally looked properly stern and said, "There is no room in this inn for you." "Please, good innkeeper," Joseph cried, "this is my wife Mary, and she's tired and heavy with child. We need a place to rest. Surely you must have some small corner somewhere that we might go." And for the first time, Wally, the innkeeper, relaxed his stiff stance and looked down at Mary. And there was a very long, long, long pause. In fact, it was so long that the audience began to feel uncomfortable and to wiggle in their seats. And off stage, the prompter was beside herself, gesturing wildly. But with a loud whisper, she said, "No, be gone, be gone." And Wally automatically repeated it, "No, be gone." And with that, Joseph sadly put his arm around Mary, and Mary rested her head on his shoulders as they began to walk away from the inn. Wally, as the innkeeper, was now supposed to go back inside the inn, but he didn't. He stood in the doorway and watching the forlorn couple as they began to leave. His mouth was open and his brow was creased and concerned, and his eyes were filled with tears. And then suddenly, that year's Christmas pageant became the difference from all of the rest. History was made as Wally shouted, "Wait, Joseph, don't go! You can have my room!" Well, there was a heated debate from that point on in the town. Some people thought that the pageant had been ruined, but most folks considered it to be the most beautiful Christmas gift of them all. Today is a day of last-minute shopping and Christmas wrapping, preparing for the celebration of a night at the end. Today is preparation for the big meals tomorrow, or the breakfast with the cinnamon rolls and the cookies after the meal, and a gathering with friends and family. And if your family is anything like mine was, stories of past Christmases and family events will once again be told. And when we tell and retell the important stories, the important stories of our life, we often find that as we tell them, there are few details that we just can't possibly leave out, even though others may think they're unimportant. For example, maybe you'll remember where it was that the hotel name was where you were married, where you took your honeymoon after getting married. Or maybe you remember the hospital name of where your children were born. Or for you golfers out there in the audience, you'll never forget who you were with, the course you were playing on when you hit that hole in one. Personally, I'm still waiting. There is some detail about every important story of your life that seems insignificant, but that you just cannot leave out. The story of the Nativity, the birth of the Christ child, is no different. The Bible tells us about a baby born to an unmarried couple under extraordinary circumstances. It tells us where it happened. It wasn't enough in scriptures just to say Bethlehem. It simply states he was born in a manger because there was no room in the inn. Nowhere in Matthew or Luke do we hear about a grumpy innkeeper who sends Joseph and Mary away. And yet, in every pageant, there is always an innkeeper who sends them away. Paintings give us a perspective of the place of birth, and legend and repeated storytelling for generations has picked a spot that is believed to be the exact place of the manger in Bethlehem. Author Kenneth Bailey, who wrote Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, takes issue with the traditional birthplace of the Christ child. He points out that traditional Palestinian village home has 2 rooms. The best room in the house was for the guests, and the main family room was where everyone else slept, including the animals. You see, the animals were brought indoors at night because they provided extra warmth within a small room, as well it was for their safety. Bailey believes that it was in this room that Jesus was born among a welcoming family. What about the inn, though? The author believes that it's a mistranslation. The Greek word for a public inn is bandochiton, like the place the Good Samaritan took the injured man. In Luke 2, the word used is kataline, meaning a place to stay. It also means guest room. It was possibly the guest room of a friend or a relative the family stayed with that was already occupied, not an inn. We begin to understand how the story of the birth of the baby Jesus was told for generations and enriched and changed as it was retold by each and every storyteller for the last 2,000 years. There's a church in Bethlehem that was built over the very spot where Jesus is said to have laid in a manger. Reverend Terry, Christine, and I toured it in 2009 when we visited Israel. Of course, it's a place that's all fancied up now, and I'm not sure if that's the exact place he was born or not, or if it even really matters. What I'm sure of, however, is that we want a place, all of us want a place we can visualize, touch, and visit so that we can keep it sacred and holy. It is interesting that in all the accounts of the birth in the manger, we are never told of the name of the inn, what it was. Was it the Bethlehem Motel or Hotel? Maybe it was the Marriott of Judea. Or how about Motel 6 of Bethlehem? What I will always wonder is if the inn owner ever realized who he had turned away. Now, if this was just a story about an innkeeper who missed an opportunity to open the doors to the Christ child over 2,000 years ago, I wouldn't be telling that today. But we're not celebrating the story of the innkeeper. In fact, I've never even seen a nativity scene with an innkeeper in it. Have you? Nobody knows the exact day when Jesus was born. Logically based on biblical descriptions, he was probably born in the middle of summer. December 25th, however, was picked by Pope Julius in 353 AD as the birth date. It was meant to counter the pagan feast of the sun god, a popular winter solstice festival which was conducted in Rome, which was the birthday celebration of the invincible sun. This was a significant celebration to the Persian god of light, who was often identified with the sun. Long before the birth of Christ, ancient people in the northern hemisphere observed the disappearance of the sun. The Christian celebration was indeed to be a theological correction. The new celebration was meant to recognize and proclaim that Christ was born in the dark world and that he is the true source of light. Is it any wonder that candles and lights are such an important part of all of our Christmas celebrations? The new celebration was intended to draw people away from the superstitions and myth and to theologically help them focus on a deeper spiritual truth. It was originally called the Feast of the Nativity. Nativity means birth or origin, a place of being born. So how can we interpret metaphysically all of the things that happened prior to one night at an inn in Bethlehem and off after? What is the deeper meaning for each of us in our own personal lives? First, we must look at two important words, faith and trust. In the first chapter of Luke, we are told of the visit that the angel Gabriel made to Mary. This young girl, only 13 or 14, was told she would bear a son named Jesus, and she briefly challenged this because she had not been with a man yet. But the angel reassured her. And you know what Mary said in Luke 1:38? Here I am, a handmaiden of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. She embraces what she has to do. Why? because she trusted God and had faith. I love how Ernest Holmes defines faith for us. Faith is a mental attitude so inwardly embodied that the mind can no longer deny it. Faith means a belief in the presence of an invincible principle and law which directly and specifically responds to us. In the Science of Mind text, he talks about trust and says, we must cleave to the good and trust absolutely in the law of God to bring about any desired end. Spirit will mold our purpose when we allow it to do so. Key words here are allow it to do so. Mary and Joseph both agreed to surrender and trust the process. They had faith in the unseen, the unknowing. I don't think that the innkeeper ever knew who he initially rejected. What I do know, however, is that all of us at some time in our life have heard a knock at the door and refused to take action. Sometimes God knocks at our door and asks if there is room at the inn. Maybe we look out and don't really like what we see, or don't like what it would mean to let the Christ consciousness into our heart, into our soul. And so we close the door and say, there is no place for you. But sometimes, just maybe, even when we're not sure, we want to open the door because we are so afraid, but yet we do it anyway. And that is what matters, because usually the unbelievable good things begin to happen in our life. You see, Christmas may be Mary and Joseph, a long journey, and about the baby in the manger and no room at the end. But the story gives us far more than what happened over 2,000 years ago. It teaches us about opening ourselves up to do what God is there to do through us in the world. It's about our response. Do we stay in that place of faith and trust as Mary and Joseph did? This story is about our willingness to tell God that even though we are unsure, afraid, or have no idea what to do yet, we want to be part of what God is doing. After all, remember, Mary said, "Here I am, a handmaiden of the Lord." The story of Christmas is not just about the birth of Jesus, but about the awakening of spirit in each and every one of us. It's about the birth of the Christ consciousness in each of us. The Christmas story is about our own awareness of oneness with God within. Charles Fillmore, in The Revealing Word, defines one birth as the awakening of a man to a consciousness of his unity with the one universal spirit, the change from mortal to spiritual consciousness through the begetting, quickening power of the word of truth. Each and every time we hear the Christmas story and celebrate the birth of Jesus, we are celebrating our own awakening to spirit and the truth if we are open and willing to receive. Note the key word, receive. Not too long ago, I was sharing with another minister about a challenge in my life. I asked them to treat for me. Their reply was simple and yet provoking. Eileen, are you willing to receive? I had never been asked that before. You see, we have to be open and willing to receive. Holmes talks about our willingness to receive in the Science of Mind text. God cannot give us anything unless we are in the mental condition to receive the gift. The law cannot do anything for us unless it does it through us. Belief is absolutely necessary to right demonstration. The Christmas story is also about revealing. In a 1929 article in the Science of Mind magazine, Ernest Holmes wrote, "The Christ which Jesus revealed is already incarnate in our own nature, and this hidden center seeks to find circumference through our lives." The birth of Jesus was not only about revealing the Christ consciousness within each of us, it was also about teaching us to expand the presence of God in our lives and in the world. As Holmes puts it, Christ is God in our lives and in the soul of man. Each of us has been given through the birth of Jesus incredible gifts. We may not always recognize them, but they are there if we just open our minds and our hearts and our souls to believe and receive. There is trust in God and a faith in the unseen. There's a newness of the Christ consciousness that is revealed to all of us when we listen to the voice within. And when the knock comes at the door, are we ready to receive the gifts from the divine, or do we run out of fear and our own self-rejection? Let us be like the poor shepherds who heard the baby had been born. You know, shepherds back then were very low on the social scale of the time. They were dirty and smelled. Their clothes left much to be desired. They expected to be rejected, and yet, as they arrived at the manger, they were accepted as for who they were. You see, they had dropped everything, leaving their flock behind to come see the new baby God had created. Let us always be ready and willing to see the wonders that God has created for us. As we reflect on this Christmas Eve and the days to come in 2024, when we are challenged to have courage over comfort, let us create Christmas Day every day in the coming year. May we be someone who doesn't close the door to our hearts when we hear God is about to do something new. When we hear about it, let us run and shout, "How can I help? How can I be here? What is mine to do?" In 2024, let us shed our fears and surrender so that God can do what needs to be done through each and every one of us. Just like the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, may we see the sacred in everyday places, people, and things. Let us challenge ourselves to ask each day, how can I express the divine today? How can I dispel the darkness and reveal the light? How can I trust and deepen my faith? How can I love the shepherds of the world and embrace them, knowing that we are one? Let us challenge ourselves tonight and every night to bring the gifts of love and acceptance to each and every situation and incident in our life. Oh, how the consciousness of our homes and towns and nation and world would shift. We can all be the gifts that Christmas brings throughout the coming year. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is. I think it's time for our offering. Oh, no, special music. Na 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 na.